Fears of Sudan sliding back into all-out civil war, increasing signs of mistrust ahead of elections in April and an independence referendum next year. What can the world powers do for Sudan? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Nick Clark. Sudan stands on the brink 5 years after a peace deal was signed, ending the country's 22-year-long civil war. Will the run-up to impending elections be peaceful, or will violence once again spiral between the north and the south, as many fear? And in exactly 1 year, the south of Sudan will vote in a referendum on whether to separate from the north. But what preparations are being made? And in the past 12 months, trouble has flared repeatedly, with more than 2,000 people killed and 350,000 displaced in the south of the country. At the weekend, so-called Beat for Peace campaigners took to the streets in 15 countries, sounding a drumbeat warning outside Downing Street in the UK, amongst other places, to urge the West to do more to prevent bloodshed in Sudan. Signed on January the 9th in 2005, the peace agreement says that oil revenues would be shared equally between the north and the south of the country. The south will have autonomy for 6 years, followed by a referendum for succession. Meanwhile, Islamic law enforcement is to remain in the north, and government jobs are to be split in a fairer way between the north and the south. Well, joining us today are our guests. In Khartoum, we have Safwat Fanous, a political scientist from the University of Khartoum in Sudan. And in London, Edward Thomas, a historian and analyst specialising in Sudan for the UK-based think tank Chatham House. Mr. Fanous, first of all, Oxfam and 9 other aid groups are warning that a lethal cocktail of rising violence, chronic poverty and political tensions leave the peace deal on the brink of collapse. How do you assess those words?
Okay, the situation in the south, as the news media have reported it, is not easy at all. Tribal conflicts keep repeating themselves with loss of life, loss of livestock and instability. Also, there are reports about corruption on a large scale. The question becomes, where is the development in the south over the last number of years? Where have the oil money gone? Tribal conflicts is very tense, or tribal relations is very tense. The SPLM, the army, the SPLA, the Sudan People Liberation Army, is not able to maintain peace and security throughout the south. And then add to this situation the tense relationship between the NCP, the National Congress Party, and the Sudan People Liberation Movement over a number of very critical issues. As the transitional period comes to an end, and as the country is heading towards the election in 4 months' time, or less than 4 months' time, and then, as everyone knows, the referendum is due in January.
Absolutely. So Mr. Fanous, if I could just jump in there, given all of that, do you think that, as some are saying, that Sudan is on the brink, is on the precipice, is very close to all-out war again?
No, I don't think so. I think this is an exaggeration. I think the two partners in the government, the NCP and the SPLM, are having good open communication with each other, and they are working very hard to solve their disagreements in a peaceful way. But of course, the issues they are discussing, they are debating, are not easy issues. And if there is violence between the two parts of the country, I think it will be limited or restricted to the 3 areas of southern Kordofan, southern Blue Nile, and the Abyei region. And I don't think it will be an all-out war again. We may witness some clashes between the troops of the two armies if the political process was not developing as smoothly as everyone hopes.
Okay, well, let's bring in Edward Thomas. Let's bring in Edward Thomas in London, if we may. What's your position? We have an election coming up in 3 months' time, a referendum in 12 months. Can things be resolved in the country in time, do you think?
Well, I think that there is a very, very hectic schedule for Sudan's leaderships over the next 12 months. There's no doubt about that. There are very complex processes that they need to complete on time. I think that the report from the aid agencies, including Oxfam and IRC, was calling for a renewed commitment to the CPA. The CPA still offers a template for some political progress in Sudan, and it still offers an alternative to massive violence, the kind of violence that would be seen if the two big legal armies in Sudan, the Sudan People's Liberation Army and the Sudan Armed Forces, started fighting each other. I think that leaderships need to be very serious about the risks of violence, but the CPA is still there. It still offers possibilities.
But we're seeing plenty of violence in the south. There's been an uptake in violence over the past 12 months, hasn't there?
There has. There's also been violence in Darfur and in southern Kordofan. The violence isn't restricted to the south. However, the violence in the south does seem to be a critical issue. Over 2,500 people killed last year, according to humanitarian sources in the UN. And that is a very serious problem that needs to be addressed by the government of Southern Sudan and as soon as possible.
Of course, there are some that are saying, Mr. Fanous, if I could address this question to you, some are saying that the violence in the south has been stirred up by the northern government, for example, inciting rival cattle herding tribes in the south. Do you think there's any credence in that?
No, I don't think this is true, and even the government of Southern Sudan is not really making that allegation. The tribal conflict is over scarce resources, and it is purely limited to the tribes doing this conflict with each other. The availability of weapons in the south goes a long time ago, from the days of the Civil War. And the tribes, all the tribes are keeping their weapons because, as I said, the Sudan People Liberation Army is not able to maintain law and order in the countryside, which is not different from the case of Darfur. So if these tribes don't feel secure, security is mainly in the big cities. So if these tribes don't feel secure, they will carry weapons. And we know that there is drought in the south. We know that there is shortage of food. And we know the history of tribal conflict, especially between the big tribes in the south. One of the characteristics of the south is that there is no tribe that can impose its hegemony, its superiority over the whole region. So there is this tribal balance between the big tribes, mainly the Dinka, the Nuer, the Shuluk.
Okay, well, gentlemen, let's just pause for a second there, because I just want to take this on a little bit. Violence is one thing. Also, it's believed there is a high potential of war between the two parties due to mistrust and the existence of so many unresolved issues ahead of the election in 3 months, and of course that referendum that we've been talking about in a year's time. The ruling Northern National Congress Party, it's being accused of lacking the political will to implement the agreement, while it's being said the SPLM, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement that we've been talking about, the party of the South, lacks the capacity to do so. There are major differences which are centred on how to share the power and the wealth of the country. Let's just quickly examine those. Despite parliamentary approval last month on a series of disputed laws between the two sides, the SPLM wants more democratic laws, including reforming the criminal code. The SPLM also rejects last year's government census that showed around 9 million people live in the south. They say it's more like 15 million, and the census results will be used to define electoral constituencies for April's vote. And then there are border issues. It's yet to be demarcated between the north and the south. Extremely sensitive, this one, as many of Sudan's valuable oil fields traverse the frontier. And also the SPLM wants state-run TV, radio and other media to be opened up to all political parties. Edward, the border issues stand out amongst that lot, don't they? Many oil fields, as I say, traverse the frontier. Isn't, in a sense, oil the problem and the answer all in one?
Well, yes, that's true to a point. Oil is the structural reason that would underlie peace, a future peace in Sudan. The oil is mostly located in southern Sudan and entirely piped and sold out of the north. And so the two sides need to keep working together in order to make the profits that they need to run their governments and to run their party systems as well. So oil does offer the possibility of a deal, at least a deal between the two elites. However, I think the border problems are much more complex than that, because the border is also an extremely populous place, and it's a place where traditional institutions and traditional formations of people have been thoroughly militarized by, in particular by the Khartoum government, but also to some extent by the rebels in the south. And it's going to be very hard to undo some of the damage of the civil war in those areas, just as the damage of the civil war seems to be continuing in southern Sudan. The availability of weapons, the militarization of everyday life, and the inability of political systems that exist in Sudan to deal with ordinary everyday problems. Instead of dealing with them, they get aggravated. Now, there's a whole set of people whose livelihoods intersect the border, just as the oil traverses the border. And it's going to be very difficult for those people to work out how their livelihoods will function if a secession takes place.
So do you think that these problems can be resolved without any dispute?
I think that as I say, there is a structural reason for peace in Sudan, and that is the fact that the two elites in Sudan both depend on the oil industry. But I think that the two leaderships need to engage very, very carefully and thoroughly with constituencies on both sides of the border if they're going to resolve these problems. There's a lot of hard feelings on both sides, partly because neither party has made an effort at reconciliation, at post-war reconciliation, but also because the political systems that exist in Sudan are very top-heavy. They're not there to help sort out people's problems. You know, everyday politics is thwarted in Sudan. It's high politics this year. And the leaderships need to be careful to address local politics at the same time as they're navigating some very complex deals about their relationships with each other over the next 12 months.
Okay, let's put some of those points to Safwat Fanous in Khartoum. How would you say you negotiate this? How do you undo the damage that the civil war caused in this crucial border area?
I agree with what Edward have said. But I may add that the two leading political parties, the NCP and the SPLM, if you look at their relationship at the local level, especially in South Kordofan and in South Blue Nile, we find that the two parties are working in harmony. The two governors and their deputies are working in harmony, which is more than the harmony we find at the top level between the leaders of the SPLM and the NCP. Now, I think this is a positive sign. And maybe the motive for these local elites to cooperate together is that they are keen to protect the interest of their own people. Because as my colleague Edward here have said, there are local interests at stake. For example, in Abyei area, the Messeria tribe, they must, in the dry season, reach the sources of water and grazing land. If they couldn't, if they failed, if they were prevented for any reason, then their livelihood is destroyed. So they will carry weapons, they will go to fight. The same thing in the Nuba Mountain and in the southern Blue Nile. We find that the tribes, the people there, half of them are with the NCP, the other half is with the SPLM, so they have to find the equation of relating with each other.
Yeah, but now, the thing is, you talk about, forgive me for jumping in, but you talk about finding the equation, but we've got 3 months to go until the election, haven't we? So with respect, it's all a little bit late to talk about talking, isn't it?
No, in Sudan, usually, like we celebrate the Eid the day before it, not celebrate it, get ready and prepare for it. There is a tradition in Sudan of keeping everything till the last moment. And like what we have seen in passing the referendum law, the popular consultation law, and the law of their self-determination or the referendum in Abyei. It was passed in the last 3 days of the National Assembly. So this is a tradition in Sudan. Yeah, and this is not surprising. There is a lot that can be done in the next 3 months if there is the political will.
Okay.
Now, if I want to come back...
Can I just go on to this issue of population and demographics and so forth? The issue of the census. It's being said by the South that the ruling NCP have bloated the figures, the population figures for the North, which then reduces the South's proportion of the population. So in that way, decreasing the number of parliamentary seats the South would be eligible for. Is this an important factor, Mr. Thomas?
I think it is, yes. The CPA became the template for the country's constitution, and the constitution can only be amended by a 75% majority in the National Assembly. Now, what the implications of that census are is that the SPLM, the southern-based group in Sudan, will lose its automatic veto over constitutional amendments. It now has 28% of seats in the parliament, but the census would give it less than 21% of seats, and that's why it's such a hot political issue. However, there are discussions, inconclusive as I understand, but there are discussions about addressing that so that the SPLM can maintain its veto power over amendments to the constitutions in the run-up to the referendum. And I think that that's a very, very important way of resolving this problem within the extremely limited timeframes that are available.
Mr. Fanous, do you think that these demographic issues can be resolved in time?
We hope so, because there is the realization that if these issues were not solved, then the election is threatened, because we cannot have election in the South without the cooperation of the SPLM. And the NCP wants the election because it serves its legitimacy. And therefore, it has a very strong motive to reach an agreement about this issue. Now, there are talks around the capital or the city here that the solution suggested is to amend the election law to add 60 more seats to the National Assembly. And these 60 more seats will all go to the South, so that the number of seats in the National Assembly will not be 450, they will increase to 510. And as I said, all these extra seats will go to the South, which will then give the South the percentage it needs to have its veto in term of, or in case the Constitution will be amended. So that the Constitution can only be amended with the support and the agreement of the SPLM.
Okay.
We have to wait and see.
Let's broaden this out to the international community now. Let me bring in the views of Archbishop Daniel Deng. He's from the mainly Christian South, of course, not in any doubt about the importance of right now in Sudan.
I personally feel that the others, the stakeholders who actually put much of their time for the negotiation during Naivashat when the CPA was signed, they have to come back the same speed they were doing it. They have to put and see why the CPA have never been done. Because even the elections the people are talking today, it should have been done long ago. But because there is a delayment, or if it is a tactic delayment, we don't know. Therefore, we want the international to come in to save Sudan, because it will be too late to allow these people to take this country back to war.
Yeah, Edward Thomas, a lot of call for the world at large to step in and ensure progress is made to smooth the way for the elections. What form can that take?
Well, there are a number of possibilities. The Archbishop was referring to the countries which signed the Comprehensive Peace Agreement back in 2005 as witnesses and also as kind of guarantors. These include the US, some European countries, the League of Arab States, the African Union, and a regional grouping known as IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. And the SPLM, I think, is very keen to ensure that these international guarantors play a role in the coming year. They have some very difficult negotiations to carry out with their partners and former adversaries in the National Congress Party. The US has recently shown a renewed commitment to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, appointing a special envoy who has been bringing the two parties together for negotiations on some of these big issues like the border, like the census, like the elections and the referendum law, trying to get agreement. However, as I say, the problem, the crisis in Sudan is not just a crisis between these two leaderships. It's also a crisis which has been caused because many other ordinary questions which have been or ordinary people's lives which have been totally turned upside down by years and years of war have not, they're not being given the space to resolve the problems that war has caused them. And there needs to be more attention at that level, at the grassroots level. Some people say that former President Thabo Mbeki, who is working in Sudan as a representative of the African Union, might be able to support some of these people-to-people processes. The SPLM would probably like to see more input from the neighbours in IGAD. Those are countries like Kenya and Uganda and Ethiopia. They would like to see more support from those groups.
Right.
And I think that...
Let me just jump in, because I want to bring in Safwat Fanous just before we go, because we're running out of time now. Spin forward 18 months, if we may. I know it's a bit hypothetical, but let's do that. Just to give us an idea of how you feel things will be in that time. You haven't been overly pessimistic about the current situation. How do you think things will be set in a year and a half?
I am optimistic in a cautious way, let me put it that way. I think, number one, there is the will on the part of the two sides, the NCP and the SPLM, to maintain the peace and not to go to the war again, because both of them will lose if they went back to war. Number two, the hardening in the negotiation process is not to reach a deadlock, but it is basically every side is trying to get the best deal for itself out of this process. But as I said, in the last 24 hours, they will always agree on difficult issues. There is this awareness in the international and regional community that peace in Sudan is vital for the stability of the whole region. So I think there is positive contribution from the regional and the global community to help the parties in Sudan maintain peace and move forward. Unfortunately, much of this effort is not made public. It is secret diplomacy, if we can call it that way. I think there is the realization also among the public opinion, especially in the north and also in the south, that the cost of going back to the war is very high. And therefore, we don't hear or we don't find people calling for returning to war or solving the problem by war. There are difficult issues, yes. They need more time, yes, but they have to be solved. One way or another, they have to be solved. The important thing is that the line of communication between the elite in the two parties, the leaders of the two parties, is open. They are always talking to each other. They are sensitive to the demands and the needs of each other. And they haven't failed up to now to solve their problems as they come and as they arise. Now, there is a short time for the election. There are a lot of challenges for that election, but I don't think they will fail us. I am hoping that they will continue carrying their responsibility because, as I said, really it is in their political interest. It is in their in the interest of their own survival as ruling parties in the north and also in the south.
Okay, gentlemen, well, you have both made a positive contribution to this particular programme, discussing how it's all going to pan out. It won't be long before we find out just how it all works out in the end. Edward Thomas and Safwat Fanous, thanks very much indeed for your views. And thanks for watching the show. Send any thoughts you have about this programme or any other issue to insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye.